Shalom, brothers in the faith. One night, as my wife and I were leaving Old Town Jerusalem, we sat for a rest at the Jaffa Plaza Square, just outside the Jaffa Gate, as we watched people joyfully capture the I Love Jerusalem sign on their phones. Three English-speaking preachers suddenly started taking turns preaching the gospel in the open square. We sat there and listened to what we thought were good messages until one went straight against the rabbis and their legalist teachings. This did not go well. The preacher elaborated on how Jewish traditions were wrongfully taught as laws and why Yeshua is the Messiah they never accepted, with verses such as in the forbidden chapter 53 of the prophet Isaiah. Brothers, what is legalism? We know Yeshua was against legalism, and he often explained legalism. And I tell you, the Protestant churches talk about it all the time, but miss entirely the teachings of the Messiah because they refuse to acknowledge the laws and the prophets. What is worse, people call legalism to obey the laws that the Father and Yeshua told us to obey. Brothers, let us read and relearn what Yeshua wanted us to know about this important subject, which is legalism. Mark 7, verses 6 through 9. Well hath Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men, for laying aside the commandment of Elohim. Ye hold the tradition of men as the washing of pots and cups, and many other such like things ye do. And he said unto them, full well ye reject the commandments of Elohim, that ye may keep your own tradition. Brothers and friends, unless there is a veil before you, you can read for yourself what legalism is by the words of Yeshua himself. Please reread it. Laying aside the commandment of Elohim, which is the Torah of Elohim, for the traditions of men. Brothers, wake up, please. Legalism is to make our man-made traditions equal to the law, the Torah of the Almighty, and worst of all, to disobey the actual commandments He wanted you to obey. Full well reject the commandment of Elohim, the Torah of Elohim. Please allow me to elaborate on some Jewish traditions that the average Christian does not know existed when the Lord Yeshua was physically on this earth. Traditions that to them have become equal to the laws of Jehovah. Let's start with Matthew 15:1. Then came to Yeshua Jesus the scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, why do thy disciples transgress? Please notice that to them this is a transgression. Why do thy disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. Now, brothers, I don't think there is anything wrong with washing your hands before eating, and I really appreciate you washing before shaking mine. But seriously, even nowadays, this tradition is still observed as law in Judaism, and in Israel, you can still find a two-handled cup in most bathrooms and dining areas for what is called the Netilat Yadayim. The tradition says that you are to pour twice on the right hand, followed by twice on the left. Unless you are Hasidic, you will do it thrice on each hand, but you must use the non-dominant hand to pour first, and you must do it before eating bread and upon wakening in the morning. The book Gemara, a collection of these Jewish laws, discusses the washing of the hands. Rabbi Serika says that Rabbi Eliezer said, anyone who treats the ritual of washing hands with contempt is uprooted from the world. Brothers, that is legalism. Please don't call legalism the commandment of Elohim. get rid of 2,000 years of Roman Catholic influence. Now, sorry for the interrupting the Jaffa Gate story. I will continue with it if you lend me a few minutes, please. Ah, at that point in the story, the evangelist explained that Yeshua was the suffering servant of Isaiah chapter 53. But after hearing some of the accusations, the Jewish Orthodox passerby soon started gathering around and refuting some of the preacher's statements. I believe someone stated that the Jews were the suffering servants, and many Orthodox started explaining what certain words meant in Hebrew. Yet, unfortunately, our English speaking preacher did not seem to know the Hebrew language at all. He ignored them at first and continued preaching in English. That's when things got out of hand. Shouting, yelling, turning to spitting and threats, until finally one of the Orthodox grabbed the preacher's Bible and laughing ran away with it. Theft accusations and chaos erupted, and at that point, I decided to step in and attempt to defuse the situation somehow. Shortly after, we were expelled, but left without a physical altercation other than some saliva cleanup, perhaps. I hear many Christians complaining about how they are mistreated in Jerusalem. I wonder, did nobody read you the small letter in this contract? Allow me to read it to you, please. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Do you still want to be a follower of this way? Well, but going back to the story, after we left, we introduced ourselves, and after a short prayer on Jaffa Street, we bid farewell. But the damage was done already, and I believe the Orthodox Jews were furious at that point, even though, as I witnessed, some of them did not understand a word of the English language. A few weeks later, a messianic praising concert would have been at the King of Kings in Jerusalem. Yet the Orthodox were present beforehand and became violent and stopped the gathering with violence. Later in the same week, the Messianic University in Netanya, north of Tel Aviv, was put on fire. I can't help but think that maybe these events were the result of what happened at Jaffa Square. After long pondering these events, I understand that several things are needed in the arsenal of any preacher of Yeshua's way in Israel before he intends to answer for the reason of his faith. Firstly, he needs to be able to explain these teachings in the language of the land, Hebrew. This is what Shaul of Tarsus, aka Paul, did during his ministry, speaking in Greek to the Greeks and, of course, Hebrew to his people. And yes, despite what the Greek roots Christians said, Hebrew was still spoken in those days. Just read about Shaul Paul or research the Dead Sea Scrolls, where most manuscripts were found written in Hebrew. There is no contest to that period. I will read some passages in Acts. And when he had given him license, Paul stood on the stairs and beckoned with the hand unto the people. And when there was made a great silence, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue. Brothers, I need to remind you that this gospel is to be preached to the Jews first. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of the Messiah, for it is the power of Elohim unto salvation to everyone that believe, to the Jew first. Now, this does not mean that we must insist on an individual accept our beliefs to the point that we are trying to force convert him. But we have to start teaching biblical Hebrew in our congregations. We have to remember this belief is of Hebrew origins, written for the Hebrew people, with Hebrew innuendos and Hebrew references, lost in any other translated language. I will give you a simple example if you don't believe it. If I say in Spanish, me canso ganso, the literal English translation is I get tired, goose. Can you understand this literal translation? If I try to explain to you what it really means, I will have to take a good 5 minutes of your time and you still wouldn't understand the meaning of it. This is exactly what happens when we read our English translations. I will put a link to a biblical Hebrew teaching ministry for those interested in learning. This ministry believes in freely you have received, freely give. Now, going back to what evangelists need to preach in Israel, the second thing they need is to learn the history of Christianity and the Jewish people through the ages, from the Constantine era to the present day. Why is this necessary? Brothers, we must understand the history of Christianity through the ages because only then will we be able to understand their strong reaction against Christianity. You must know that to them, the Jewish people, Christianism is a religion that has tried to, for centuries, to eradicate their ancient beliefs. Most Jewish believe that Jesus and Christianity are a foreign belief. Can you imagine? Probably Greek or even English. Most of them, as most Christians in America do, don't realize that Yeshua was Hebrew. And how could they? His title, Christ, is not even Hebrew. And names like Jesus, Paul, and John are not Hebrew as well. It sounds more like a Beatles band to me. To the Jews, someone preaching Christ in the land of Israel is someone attempting to force converting them again, as Catholicism did to them for centuries. And when I say force converting, I don't mean it lightly because Christianism for centuries did dispossess, torture, and even executed by fire not only the followers of Judaism, but also the Messianic Jewish followers of Yeshua. Brothers, there were thousands of Jewish believers in the first centuries before Constantine and the Roman Church took over the belief. Just read Acts 2:41 when thousands of Jews who had convened for the feast of Shavuot were added to the faith in only one day. Whether you are Messianic, Presbyterian, Protestant, or Catholic, it doesn't matter to Orthodox Jewish. To them, the followers of Yeshua are all Catholics. The Catholics themselves have spread that message because Catholic means universal, right? Absolutely not. We are not the same unless your mediator between Elohim and you are baby Jesus, Mary, and the saints. I know my mediator is Yeshua the Messiah, and he is no baby in a manger or has been for ages now. Please don't be deceived. Do you want to know what Yeshua will be like on his return? When he come back, people will say to the mountains, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of the wrath has come, and who can stand? Did that sound like a baby coming back to this earth? Please wake up to these Catholic errors and fantasies. The last and the most essential thing needed for preaching in the land of Israel is the backing of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. That is how it was done in the times of Yeshua. In Pentecost, the evangelists were full of the Holy Spirit when thousands were added to this faith. Only then will we be able to properly serve the Almighty sitting on the throne and the Lamb. Finally, we can't leave this video without returning to Isaiah 53, the chapter in question when the altercation began at Jaffa Gate. Was Yeshua the suffering servant? Or was the Jewish people the suffering servant? After all, haven't the Jews suffered through millennia? We know all the suffering they endured under the German Nazis and how they wandered the earth dispossessed and without country. Now, I have decided to divide this video into two parts so we can dedicate just one video on Isaiah 53. Please stay tuned for the oncoming video. Shalom unto all, and until the next one. Peace.